They once laughed in my face when I proposed building cities with moss and solar power. Now they're begging to work for me without knowing I'm the founder. Worse still, their boss just sent a strategic partnership request. They have no idea that interview was a test I've waited 10 years to administer. My name is Naomi Fraser. I'm 36 years old, an urban designer and environmental engineer currently living in obscurity along the Cornish coast of England. The sound of waves against the cliffs has become the metronome of my life, marking time as I build something that was once considered impossible. 10 years ago, I was just the odd one out in a family of traditional property developers. Today, I'm the invisible force behind EcoSpires, one of the most innovative sustainable architecture firms in Europe. Most people know the company, but they don't know me. To the world, I'm simply Lane, a mysterious figure who never appears in person at conferences or award ceremonies. That was by design. I wanted my work judged solely on its merit, not filtered through the lens of gender or family connections. But now, as I sit in my self-built clifftop home, reviewing job applications on my tablet, fate has delivered something I never expected: a reckoning. The first application made me nearly drop my cup of mint tea. Isabel Fraser, my older sister. The second came moments later: Callum Fraser, my cousin. Both applying for senior positions at my company. Both completely unaware that the woman they ridiculed a decade ago would be reviewing their qualifications. And then, as if the universe had decided to deliver all its ironies in one day, an email from Malcolm Fraser, my father and CEO of Fraser Holdings, proposing a strategic green initiative partnership. The same man who once told me building with moss was hippie nonsense. I set the tablet down and walked to the window. My home's curved walls were alive with vegetation, temperature regulated by a passive hydroponic system I designed myself. Outside, the wind turbines I installed rotated silently against the twilight sky. Everything around me existed because I refused to let their laughter be the last word. I still remember that night in 2014, like it was yesterday. The Fraser family's annual summer gala at our London estate. I had just completed my dual master's degree and was eager to share my thesis project: an integrated eco-housing system that could reduce energy consumption by 78% while producing food for its inhabitants. I'd spent 2 years developing the concept, working nights while completing my studies, building miniature prototypes in my tiny apartment. The memory still stings when I let it. The grand dining room, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished mahogany, the family gathered around in their finest attire. I had set up a small display table with my model and presentation boards. As the youngest daughter, I was used to fighting for attention. But that night I was sure they would finally see me, really see me for what I could contribute. Ladies and gentlemen, I had begun, my voice steadier than my hands. The future of urban living isn't about building bigger or higher, it's about building smarter, in harmony with natural systems. I still see Isabel's perfectly manicured eyebrow arching as she sipped her champagne. Callum leaning over to whisper something to his father, both of them smirking. My father standing at the head of the table, arms crossed over his bespoke suit. The exterior walls incorporate living moss that acts as natural insulation while filtering air pollutants. I explained, pointing to the greenery on my model. The integrated hydroponic system means each unit can grow up to 30% of a family's produce needs. Naomi, darling, Isabel had interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. It's a sweet science project, but people who can afford luxury homes don't want to live in a terrarium. Callum had chimed in then. Can you imagine trying to sell this to our clients? Would you prefer the moss-covered walls with or without the mushrooms growing in your closet? The room erupted in laughter. My father had simply shaken his head. The Fraser name stands for timeless luxury, not experimental greenhouses. No one's going to invest millions to live in what looks like an abandoned building covered in weeds. I tried to explain the economics, the sustainability metrics, the long-term benefits, but each point I made was dismissed with increasingly cutting remarks. Perhaps you should join one of those nonprofits if you're so concerned about saving the planet. my mother had suggested, as if it were a gentle way to redirect my misguided passion. Or just marry an eccentric billionaire who can fund your little projects, Isabel added with a wink that made everyone chuckle. The final blow came from my father. Fraser Holdings builds homes people aspire to own, not science experiments they have to maintain. This isn't practical, Naomi. It's not real estate. It's fantasy. I had packed up my model while they moved on to discussing Isabel's latest luxury development in Kensington. No one noticed when I slipped away from the party, carrying my rejected future in a cardboard box. That night, in my small London flat, I made a decision. I took out my journal and wrote a single line, "Build something they cannot ignore." The next morning, I withdrew the inheritance my grandmother had left me, the only money I had that wasn't controlled by my family. It wasn't much by Fraser standards, just £80,000. But it was enough to start. I legally changed my professional name to N. Lane, rented an abandoned garage space near Newquay, and disappeared from London society. Those first years were brutally difficult. I slept on a cot in the corner of my makeshift workshop, showered at a local gym, and poured every penny into materials and equipment. I taught myself programming to create climate control systems, worked with local farmers to understand soil composition, and experimented with different moss varieties to find those most suitable for building integration. My first prototype was a disaster. The moss died within weeks, and the water recycling system leaked constantly. The second was better, but still nowhere near viable. By the third year, I had refined my system enough to build a small habitable structure, a single room with living walls that maintained a perfect internal climate. I documented everything meticulously, published papers under my pseudonym, and gradually built a reputation in academic circles. A small environmental foundation offered me a grant to expand my research. Then a tech company commissioned a moss-integrated server room that reduced cooling costs by 62%. 5 years after that humiliating family dinner, I had enough capital and credibility to launch EcoSpires officially. I hired a public-facing CEO, Eliza Chen, a brilliant architect who believed in my vision and was willing to be the company's face while I remained its brain. We started small, with urban renewal projects and consulting work, but each success led to larger opportunities. Our breakthrough came when the city of Rotterdam commissioned us to redesign a post-industrial neighborhood into a self-sustaining community. The project took 2 years to complete, but when the drone footage of the finished development went viral, everything changed. Suddenly, EcoSpires was fielding calls from governments and developers worldwide. The same concepts my family had laughed at were now being hailed as revolutionary. All this time, I maintained my anonymity. Lane became known as a reclusive genius, with speculation running wild about who I might be. Some thought I was a disillusioned oil executive atoning for past sins. Others believed I was a collective of scientists working under one name. No one suspected I was the estranged daughter of Malcolm Fraser, living in a self-built eco-home on the Cornish coast. I kept tabs on my family through industry news. Fraser Holdings had continued building the same luxury developments they always had, though they'd added some token solar panels and eco-friendly marketing to their brochures in recent years. Isabel had taken over as creative director, while Callum headed their international business development. From social media posts, they seemed to be living the glittering lives they'd always wanted. And now, here they were, both applying to work for me. The irony was almost too perfect. I poured myself a glass of wine from my small vineyard, another experiment that had proven surprisingly successful, and made a decision. I would interview them personally, something I never did. They wouldn't recognize me. I'd changed considerably in 10 years. My once polished appearance had given way to a simpler style. My previously straight hair now fell in natural waves, lightened by the sun. I rarely wore makeup anymore, and years of building things with my hands had left them stronger, slightly calloused. More importantly, I wasn't the nervous, eager-to-please younger sister anymore. I was the founder of a company that had revolutionized sustainable architecture. I had nothing to prove, least of all to them. I scheduled the interviews for the following week at our London office, a converted warehouse with living walls and a rooftop garden that produced vegetables for our staff cafeteria. I rarely visited the location, preferring to work from Cornwall, but this was a special occasion. Isabel's interview was first. I watched through the security feed as she arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in an impeccable beige suit, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She charmed the receptionist, accepted a glass of water, and reviewed notes on her tablet while waiting. The consummate professional. When she was shown into the interview room, I was already seated at the table, dressed simply in black trousers and a white linen shirt. No designer labels, no jewelry except a wooden bracelet carved from reclaimed oak. "Isabel Fraser," I said, rising to shake her hand. "I'm Naomi, head of innovation." I saw no recognition in her eyes, just the polite, slightly calculating smile she reserved for networking opportunities. "Pleasure to meet you," she replied, her grip firm but not overpowering. Perfect interview handshake. She'd always been good at these games. "Please, have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from me. "I've reviewed your portfolio. Impressive work with Fraser Holdings. Why the interest in EcoSpires?" She launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about always having been passionate about sustainable development and seeing the future of real estate in green innovation. She spoke about synergies and market differentiation and elevating eco-conscious design to luxury standards. Not once did she mention actual environmental impact or resource conservation or community building, the core values of EcoSpires. I nodded along, then shifted to technical questions. "What's your understanding of passive thermal regulation in building design?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, it's about using natural methods to maintain comfortable temperatures, reducing reliance on mechanical systems." "Could you be more specific? What materials or techniques would you employ in a north-facing structure in a temperate climate?" She began talking about adequate insulation and strategic window placement, textbook generalities that any first-year architecture student could recite. When I pressed for specifics about R values or thermal mass calculations, she pivoted to discussing how these technical details could be handled by your excellent engineering team, while she focused on the overall aesthetic vision. I continued through my list of questions, watching her grow increasingly uncomfortable as it became clear she lacked the technical knowledge her resume had implied. Finally, I asked the question I most wanted an answer to. What would you say to someone who proposed using living moss as a primary building material? Her laugh was immediate and dismissive. "Well, that's rather impractical, isn't it? It's a lovely concept for small feature walls or artistic installations, but for serious architecture..." She shook her head. "Clients want reliability and prestige, not experimental materials that might create maintenance nightmares." 10 years, and nothing had changed. I thanked her for her time and told her we'd be in touch. Callum arrived 15 minutes late for his interview, offering a rehearsed apology about London traffic. He wore a fashionably rumpled linen suit and carried a leather portfolio that he placed carefully on the table between us. "I've brought some conceptual sketches," he said before I could ask my first question. "I think they'll give you a sense of my vision for where EcoSpires could go next." He opened the portfolio to reveal drawings of sleek, glass-heavy structures with token green roofs and living wall features that were clearly decorative rather than functional. The buildings looked like every other luxury development in London, just with plants attached as accessories. "These are interesting," I said, studying his face rather than the drawings. "But I'm curious about your technical background. Your resume mentions innovative material integration. Could you elaborate?" Like his sister, Callum was long on buzzwords and short on substance. He spoke about spaces that feel like a breath of fresh air and designs that resonate with the natural world's vibrations. When I asked specific questions about water management systems or solar gain calculations, he deflected, suggesting that creative visionaries like himself worked best when paired with detail-oriented team members. I pressed harder. EcoSpire's success is built on the integration of aesthetic design with functional environmental systems. How would you approach designing a building that produces more energy than it consumes? He blinked, then recovered with a smile. I believe in starting with the human experience. How does the space feel? What emotions does it evoke? Once we establish that connection, we can layer in the technical elements, solar panels, efficient systems, whatever the engineers recommend. Whatever the engineers recommend, I repeated slowly. So you don't have specific knowledge about renewable energy integration in architectural design? His confidence faltered only slightly. My strength is in creating concepts that inspire. I work with technical teams to execute the vision. I nodded, then asked my final question. What do you think about building with moss? Unlike Isabel's dismissive laugh, Callum's response was more carefully calculated. It's an interesting concept for certain applications, perhaps for feature elements or experimental pavilions. I could see incorporating it as an artistic statement in the right project. Damning with faint praise, at least he was slightly more diplomatic than his sister. I ended the interview and escorted him out personally. As we walked through the office, I noticed him taking in the living wall systems, the hydroponics towers growing lettuce and herbs, the transparent solar panels integrated into the skylights. For a moment, I thought I saw genuine curiosity in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his professional mask. Impressive setup, he said. Very on-brand. It's not branding, I replied. It's functionality. The plants you see purify our air and regulate humidity. The vegetables supply our cafeteria. The building produces 118% of the energy it consumes. He nodded politely, clearly not fully grasping what I was telling him. Well, I look forward to hearing from you. I think I could bring a lot to your team. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room, reviewing my notes. Neither of them was qualified for the positions they'd applied for. Neither understood the fundamental principles that made EcoSpires successful. They saw green design as a market trend to capitalize on, not a necessary evolution of how we build and live. More importantly, neither had grown beyond the limitations that had led them to dismiss my ideas 10 years ago. They still couldn't see the forest for the trees, or in this case, the moss for the marketing opportunity. The email from Malcolm Fraser, my father, still sat in my inbox, marked as unread. The subject line read, Potential Strategic Partnership, Fraser Holdings and EcoSpires. I opened it finally, scanning the corporate language about synergizing our complementary strengths and bringing EcoSpires innovations to the luxury market. He proposed a meeting next week to discuss how Fraser Holdings could help scale your interesting concepts to our discerning clientele. The familiar patronizing tone was evident even in written form. He wasn't proposing a partnership of equals. He was offering to legitimize what he still saw as an experimental boutique firm by attaching the prestigious Fraser name to it. I forwarded the email to my assistant with instructions to schedule the meeting at our London office. It was time to close this chapter of my life. The following week, I arrived at the office early, spending time with my team, connecting with the people who had helped build EcoSpires into what it was today. Unlike my family, they had believed in the vision from the start, often working for below-market salaries in the early years because they believed in what we were creating. At precisely noon, my assistant informed me that the Fraser Holdings delegation had arrived. I watched on the security feed as my father entered the building, flanked by Isabel and Callum. They were shown to our main conference room, where Eliza Chen, our public-facing CEO, greeted them warmly. I waited 5 minutes before entering. When I walked in, Eliza was midway through a presentation about our recent projects. Ah, and here's our founder, she said, gesturing to me, Naomi Lane. My father stood to shake my hand, all business charm. Malcolm Fraser, CEO of Fraser Holdings. These are my senior directors, Isabel and Callum. I took his outstretched hand. Actually, it's Naomi Fraser. We've met before. The confusion on his face lasted only seconds before recognition dawned. Isabel gasped audibly. Callum froze, portfolio half open on the table. Naomi. My father recovered first, his voice a mixture of shock and something that might have been pride. You're Lane. You founded EcoSpires. I did. I took my seat at the head of the table. 10 years ago, after the family made it clear they had no interest in my hippie nonsense about sustainable building practices. Silence filled the room. Eliza, who knew my history, sat back with a small smile. She had been looking forward to this moment almost as much as I had. Isabel found her voice first. Why didn't you tell us we're family? The same reason I didn't use my real name professionally. I wanted the work judged on its merits, not influenced by preconceptions or connections. I turned to my father. Now, I believe you wanted to discuss a partnership. He rallied admirably, shifting into negotiation mode. Yes, well, this is certainly unexpected, but perhaps it makes our proposal even more appropriate. Bringing you back into the Fraser Holdings umbrella would be— I'm not interested in coming under anyone's umbrella. I interrupted. EcoSpires is doing quite well on its own. Of course. He backpedaled. I meant a mutually beneficial arrangement. Your innovative approaches combined with our market reach and client base. I opened my tablet and pulled up their proposal, which I had thoroughly analyzed. Your proposal suggests Fraser Holdings would provide capital investment and client connections, while EcoSpires would supply sustainable design elements to be incorporated into your existing development model. Exactly. My father nodded. We bring your ideas to a much wider market. The problem, I continued, is that your development model is fundamentally at odds with our principles. You're proposing to cherry-pick aesthetic elements of our designs while ignoring the integrated systems that make them functional. Now, Naomi, he began, his tone slipping into the patronizing one I remembered so well. We have to be realistic about what the luxury market will accept. That's precisely the kind of thinking that kept you from seeing the potential 10 years ago. I replied evenly. You're still treating sustainability as a marketing feature rather than a core value. Isabel jumped in, ever the mediator. We've evolved since then, Naomi. Look at our recent developments: solar panels, green roofs, rainwater collection. Surface treatments, I dismissed. Your buildings still consume more than they produce. They're still designed around status rather than function. The market demands certain aesthetics, Callum argued. We're meeting clients where they are. And that's your choice. I acknowledged. But it's not compatible with what we do here. At EcoSpires, the environmental systems aren't additions to the design, they are the design. My father leaned forward, his business face now fully engaged. Be reasonable, Naomi. You've created something impressive. But think about the scale we could achieve together. Fraser Holdings operates in 12 countries. We could bring your ideas to developments worldwide. Watered down and repackaged as luxury amenities, I countered. No thank you. Is this because of what happened years ago? Isabel asked, her voice softening. We didn't understand then, but we can see now that you were ahead of your time. I looked at each of them in turn. This isn't about vindication. It's about integrity. EcoSpires exist to change how we build and live, not to help conventional developers greenwash their portfolios. My father's expression hardened. He had never liked being refused. You're letting personal feelings cloud your business judgment. This partnership could be worth millions. EcoSpires is already worth millions, I replied calmly. And more importantly, it's making a genuine difference. We've reduced carbon emissions by thousands of tons annually. Our buildings produce food, clean water, and renewable energy. We're not interested in diluting that impact for faster growth. The meeting deteriorated from there. My father made increasingly generous financial offers. Isabel tried emotional appeals about family reconciliation. Callum attempted to position himself as a bridge between our different approaches. I remained firm. By the time they left, it was clear that no partnership would be forthcoming. As they gathered their materials, my father made one last attempt. You could have just told us who you were from the beginning. All this secrecy was unnecessary. I met his gaze steadily. Would you have listened any differently, or would you have expected me to adapt my vision to fit the Fraser Holdings model because of our family connection? He had no answer for that. After they left, Eliza stayed behind. Well, that was satisfying to watch, she said with a grin. Though I suspect Thanksgiving invitations will be scarce this year. I laughed. I haven't been to a Fraser family Thanksgiving in a decade. I don't think I'll start now. So what's next? She asked. Now that your secret identity is blown, at least to your family. I considered the question. For 10 years, I had worked in the shadows, letting my creations speak for themselves. The anonymity had served its purpose, allowing ecospires to be judged solely on the merit of our work. But perhaps it was time for a change. I think, I said slowly, it's time for New Lane to have a face. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited my family to my home. Not the London flat I maintained for occasional use, but my real home on the Cornish coast. The living structure I had built with my own hands, the culmination of all my research and experimentation. They arrived as the sun was setting, casting golden light across the curved living walls of my home. I met them at the entrance path, watching their expressions as they took in the structure that seemed to grow from the cliffside itself. You live here? Isabel asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. I built it, I corrected. And yes, I live here. I led them inside, watching as they registered the details the way natural light filtered through specialized membranes. The living walls that humidified and purified the air. The hydroponic system integrated into room dividers that supplied most of my food needs. This is all functional? My father asked, touching a moss-covered wall cautiously. Everything serves multiple purposes. I explained. The moss regulates humidity and filters air. The curved walls maximize solar gain in winter and minimize it in summer. The water systems recycle everything, purifying gray water for reuse. I showed them the control systems I had designed, the energy metrics that showed the house producing far more power than it consumed, the food production data from my integrated gardens. And you maintain all this yourself? Callum asked, clearly struggling to reconcile the complex systems with the absence of a maintenance staff. The systems are largely self-regulating, I explained. That was the point from the beginning, to create buildings that work with natural processes rather than constantly fighting against them. I led them to the dining area, where I had prepared a simple meal from my garden. No caterers, no staff, just food I'd grown and prepared myself. As we sat down to eat, an uncomfortable silence fell. 10 years of estrangement couldn't be bridged in a single evening, especially after the confrontational meeting earlier. Why did you invite us here? My father finally asked. To show us what we missed out on investing in. I shook my head. I invited you because it's time for honesty. You should know who I am and what I've built. Not so you can take credit for it or try to acquire it, but so you can understand it. It's extraordinary, Isabel admitted, looking around. I never imagined something like this could be so livable. In my head, sustainable architecture always meant sacrificing comfort or aesthetics. That's the fundamental misconception, I replied. Working with natural systems doesn't mean sacrifice. It means designing differently from the beginning. We ate in silence for a few minutes before Callum spoke up. I'm sorry about the interview. If I'd known it was you would have what, I interrupted, been more prepared. Tailored your answers to what you thought I wanted to hear. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. That's not fair, Isabel protested. We weren't at our best because we were nervous. Job interviews are stressful. Life is stressful, I countered. Building a company from nothing is stressful. Pioneering systems that people tell you are impossible is stressful. But you rise to the occasion if you truly believe in what you're doing. My father set down his fork. Naomi, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're impressed by what you've accomplished. You've proven your point. Now can we discuss how to move forward as a family? Perhaps with some business collaboration. I laughed, not unkindly. That's always been the difference between us. You see this as a negotiating position, a way to leverage something. I see it as my life's work. Then why bring us here at all? He demanded. What's the point of this dinner if not reconciliation? I looked around at the home I had created, at the systems working in harmony, at the manifestation of the vision they had once ridiculed. Then I looked at my family, accomplished, privileged, and still fundamentally unable to understand what drove me. "I didn't invite you for reconciliation," I said quietly. "I invited you for recognition. I don't need your approval or your partnership or your investment. I just wanted you to see me, really see me for the first and last time." Isabel's eyes widened. "The last time, what does that mean?" "It means after tonight, we go back to our separate lives. You continue building Fraser Holdings properties, and I continue building EcoSpire's communities. No hard feelings, no lingering resentment, just clarity." "That's rather dramatic," my father scoffed. "We're still family, regardless of business disagreements." "Are we?" I asked simply. "When was the last time any of you asked about my life? When was the last time you were interested in what I was creating, before you knew it was commercially successful?" The silence that followed was answer enough. The rest of the dinner passed in awkward conversation about neutral topics. They complimented the food, asked polite questions about how various systems in the house worked, and carefully avoided any mention of business partnerships or family obligations. As they prepared to leave, Isabel pulled me aside. "I really am sorry, Naomi. Not just about the interview, but about that night years ago. I didn't understand what you were trying to do." "I know," I said, and found that I meant it. "You couldn't have. It was too far from your frame of reference." And now could I understand now? I studied my sister's face, seeing perhaps the first genuine interest she had ever shown in my work. "Maybe. If you really wanted to. I'd like to try," she said quietly. "Not for Fraser Holdings, but for me. I'd like to understand what you've built." It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation that would have capped a fairy tale ending, but it was something real, a small opening where before there had been only a wall. The next morning, I arrived at EcoSpire's London office earlier than usual. The staff were beginning to filter in, coffee cups in hand, preparing for another day of designing and building a more sustainable future. I nodded to the security guard, took the elevator to the main floor, and simply stood in the open work area, watching as my team assembled. They noticed me gradually, conversations pausing as they registered my presence. I rarely visited the London office, and never without scheduling meetings in advance. "Good morning," I said when most had arrived. "I'm Naomi Fraser. You know me as N. Lane. I founded EcoSpires 10 years ago and have been working alongside you, mostly from my Cornwall location, ever since." A murmur ran through the room. Some looked surprised, others nodded as if confirming long-held suspicions. Eliza Chen, standing at the back, gave me an encouraging smile. "I started this company because I believed buildings could do more than simply house us. They could feed us, clean our air and water, generate our power, and connect us to natural systems rather than isolating us from them." I looked around at the faces of the people who had helped bring that vision to life. For a decade, I've kept my identity private because I wanted our work to be judged solely on its merits. I didn't want my gender, my age, or my family connections to influence how people perceived what we were creating. I moved to the center of the room, feeling more exposed than I had in years, but also strangely liberated. But anonymity has its limitations. We've reached a point where EcoSpires needs a public advocate who can speak passionately about our mission, who can challenge conventional thinking in person, not just through our designs. I once thought hiding myself was the only way to ensure our work received fair consideration. But true progress requires presence. I took a deep breath. From today, I'll be taking a more public role. No more mysterious N. Lane. Just me, the woman who believes buildings should be as alive as the people who inhabit them. The silence lasted only a moment before someone began to applaud. Others joined in, not out of shock or surprise, but out of recognition. They had always known the spirit behind the company, even if they hadn't known my name or face. As the applause died down, people returned to their work with renewed energy. Several approached me with questions or ideas they'd been saving for the elusive founder. For the first time, I walked through the office as myself, not a shadow, not a mystery. just a woman who had built something that mattered. Later that day, as I sat in what had been Eliza's office but would now serve as mine when I was in London, I received an email from Isabel. The subject line read simply, "A beginning." The message contained only a link to an article she'd written for an architecture journal, titled Rethinking Luxury: What True Sustainability Could Mean for High-End Development. It wasn't revolutionary. Isabel wasn't suddenly an eco-warrior, but it showed genuine thought about how Fraser Holdings might evolve beyond token green features. I replied with one line, "It's a start." That evening, as I prepared to return to Cornwall, I stood on the roof garden of our London office, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there were the Fraser Holdings headquarters, where my family continued to build the way they always had. And here I was, finally stepping into the light after a decade in the shadows. The moss walls around me absorbed the last golden rays of sunlight, storing energy for the night ahead. Plants that had once been dismissed as weeds were now purifying air, regulating temperature, and producing food. Systems that had been called impractical were now reducing carbon emissions across multiple continents. I hadn't built something they couldn't ignore. I'd built something they couldn't imagine until they saw it with their own eyes. 10 years ago, I had walked away from a family dinner with a cardboard box containing a rejected dream. Today, that dream had grown beyond anything I could have predicted. Not because I had sought validation from those who had dismissed it, but because I had believed in it enough to nurture it when no one else would. And that, I realized as I touched the living wall beside me, feeling its subtle warmth, was the true success, not proving them wrong, but proving myself right. The sun set over London, casting long shadows across the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand what Ecospires could accomplish. But tonight, standing amid the garden I had helped create, I finally felt at home in my own name. My name is Naomi Fraser. I build living buildings that heal the world around them. And after 10 years of hiding in plain sight, I'm finally ready to be seen.